So if you really want to understand the true, unfiltered character of America, you shouldn't just look at the Constitution sitting in a glass at the National Archives.
Right, because that's just the formal document.
Exactly. I mean, you need to look at a 1940s radio broadcast about the invention of cellophane. Or, like, listen to a dramatized true crime report of a guy getting into a fistfight with a ketchup bottle on the 4th of July.
Which actually happened.
It did. And I want you to just picture something with me for a second. Imagine it's late. Very late. It's the 4th of July, the fireworks are all done, and there's that faint smell of sulfur and charcoal still hanging in the humid air.
Oh, yeah, that very specific summer night smell.
Right, and the two of us are sitting here in a quiet, dimly lit studio at Chesterton Radio on Commercial Street in Atchison, Kansas.
It really is that highly specific kind of quiet that only descends after a long day of public celebration.
Yeah, when the parades are over.
Right, when the crowds have dispersed and the whole country is just collectively exhaling in the dark.
And the reason we're sitting in this quiet studio tonight, with the microphones on, is because we have literally just spent the entire day from dawn to midnight listening to an extraordinary marathon of Independence Day broadcasts.
Pulled straight from America's golden age of radio.
Right. We've been poring over these old acetate discs and tape reels and discovering what looks like a complete 24-hour broadcast schedule from decades ago.
But our mission for this deep dive is definitely not to just wallow in nostalgia.
No, not at all. We aren't here to get all misty-eyed over the crackle of vintage audio.
Far from it. The goal here is to treat this entire 4th of July collection as a singular, monumental body of work.
Yeah.
And we want to ask a really pointed question. What kind of civilization believed these broadcasts were worth producing?
Because when you look at the sheer density of this programming, it really forces you to wonder what these shows say about the American character.
Exactly. What kind of society demanded such complex, highly nuanced, and sometimes really intellectual content as their primary form of holiday entertainment?
I'm honestly still buzzing from the scale of the craftsmanship. Finding this schedule felt like unearthing a sociological time capsule.
It really is a time capsule.
I mean, if you look at the run of show, they were balancing dense historical education, highbrow poetry, slapstick sitcom humor, gritty police blotters.
And philosophical sermons.
Yes, and sweeping symphonic music too, all stitched together into one continuous sonic tapestry.
Which completely shatters that modern assumption that past generations just wanted simplistic, flag-waving propaganda on a national holiday.
Right. But to understand the mechanics of why this worked, we first have to talk about the medium itself.
Yeah, radio in its golden age really functioned as a national campfire.
A campfire, I like that.
Well, think about the physical dynamics of a campfire. It requires everyone to face inward, right? Toward a central source of light and heat.
Leaving the vast darkness at their backs.
Exactly. It forces a shared focus. Whereas today, if you and I are consuming media, we're likely staring at our individual screens.
Which are basically like billions of separate flashlights pointing in completely different directions.
That's a great way to put it. But back then, millions of Americans tuned in simultaneously to hear a single voice. Or a single orchestra emanating from a wooden zenith cabinet in their living room.
And that forged a cohesive national identity.
It really did.
And it wasn't passive either. That's the part that really struck me today. Like, if you're listening to this deep dive right now, you might have us on while you're commuting.
Or doing the dishes, walking the dog.
Right. But listening to these old broadcasts, you can feel how they demanded the room. They required active, dedicated listening.
The brain literally had to work to co-create the imagery.
Yeah.
Because the neurological demand of radio is actually quite profound. Since there's no visual stimulus, your auditory cortex is forcing the rest of your brain to paint the sets, cast the actors.
And visualize the action.
Exactly. And the producers knew this. The writers knew this.
So when they crafted a historical drama for something like The Cavalcade of America, or when the NBC Symphony Orchestra swelled into a crescendo, it wasn't just background noise.
No, it was a synchronized emotional event. You have a steelworker in a Pennsylvania mill town, a farmer out in Nebraska, and an accountant in Manhattan.
All experiencing the exact same cadence of speech.
Right. The exact same dramatic pause at the exact same millisecond. And that shared auditory experience creates a powerful kind of cultural glue.
I kept thinking about that cultural glue, especially when the schedule shifted from like high art to corporate advertising.
Oh, the commercials.
Yes, because even the commercials felt like they were participating in this massive, unified civic project. There was this one broadcast from DuPont.
Oh, the cellophane one.
Yeah. I was genuinely chuckling to myself as I listened to it. They took a commercial for cellulose film.
Which is literally just cellophane, the stuff we wrap leftovers in.
Exactly. And they pitched it as this revolutionary, deeply patriotic advancement for the American housewife.
It is an absolute masterclass in the psychology of mid-century advertising.
It totally is.
But it's also a fascinating window into how the American psyche tied consumption to national destiny.
Right. Because they gave the listeners a highly dramatic mini chemistry lecture.
Complete with the booming announcer voice.
Oh, yeah. The guy with the most authoritative voice possible describes how cellophane begins as raw chips of spruce wood. Then it gets transformed into a thick liquid, endures an acid bath, and emerges as clear as crystal.
All to protect the nation's food from dirt and germs.
And they even bragged, with total sincerity, mind you, that 700,000 yards of DuPont cellophane were used to create Fairyland in the Hollywood movie A Midsummer Night's Dream.
Wow.
Yeah. It was framed not just as a handy kitchen product, but as a triumph of American ingenuity.
We have to consider the context of the era there.
Right.
The chemical industry in the 1930s and 40s was just exploding, but they had to convince a pretty skeptical public that these lab-created artificial materials were safe
And necessary.
and morally good. Their slogan, "Better Things for Better Living Through Chemistry," wasn't merely a corporate tagline to drive quarterly profits.
It was presented as a manifestation of the American spirit itself.
Exactly. The underlying argument was that science, industry, and free enterprise were working hand in hand to elevate the health, hygiene, and happiness of the everyday citizen.
So buying cellophane was practically a civic duty.
It meant you were participating in the unstoppable march of American progress.
It's a completely unified worldview. Industry, art, history, and daily life were all pulling in the exact same direction.
Very different from today.
Oh, completely. Thinking about our media landscape today where everything is fractured,
Yeah.
I mean, I have a feed tailored specifically to my biases.
Your shopping habits, your political leanings.
Right. And you have a feed tailored to yours. If every single citizen is living inside a bespoke algorithmic reality, is it even mechanically possible to have a shared national memory anymore?
That is a really tough question.
Because we don't have that central campfire. We have 100 million different flashlights.
And that is perhaps the most critical vulnerability of the digital age. When the common ground shrinks to the size of a demographic niche, the ability to sustain a massive, diverse republic becomes incredibly difficult.
Right.
The cultural glue of the radio era wasn't just that everyone heard the same transmission. It was that the content itself was meticulously designed to speak to a shared set of foundational values.
So true. But to really understand how that glue held the country together, we have to examine how these broadcasts treated the bedrock of the American story, the Founding Fathers.
This was a huge revelation in the marathon.
It really was. I went into this expecting a very specific kind of history. I assumed a 4th of July broadcast from the 1940s or 50s would treat the founders like flawless marble gods.
You expected the audio equivalent of a dusty museum exhibit.
Yes, where everyone speaks in hushed, reverent tones about how perfect Thomas Jefferson and John Adams were. But I was entirely wrong.
They leaned incredibly hard into the struggles.
And the bitter failures, and the stark, terrifying humanity of these people.
Because they understood a fundamental rule of storytelling that we honestly often forget today. Sanitizing history robs it of its power.
Oh, that's so true.
If the founders are infallible demigods, then the creation of the United States was simply inevitable.
And there is no drama in inevitability.
Exactly. But if they are portrayed as flawed, terrified, deeply conflicted human beings operating in the dark, then their achievements become miraculous.
Which brings us perfectly to CBS's You Are There, broadcast covering July 4th, 1776.
A brilliant piece of audio.
The format of this show is pure genius. They took the signing of the Declaration of Independence and treated it like a modern live breaking news event.
So you have radio reporters with microphones supposedly stationed right on the floor of the Continental Congress in Philadelphia.
The mechanical execution of this in a live studio is just staggering. The producers were essentially pioneering a new genre of auditory immersion.
They really were.
And I was geeking out over the Foley art alone. You hear the reporters whispering into the microphone as if they're trying not to interrupt the proceedings.
Right, and you hear the ambient rustle of parchment.
The creaking of wooden chairs, the murmurs of the delegates, and they even piped in the sound of horseflies buzzing around the room.
Oh, right, because the State House was near a livery stable.
Yes, and the delegates were sweltering in the July heat. It strips away all that oil painting mythology and puts you right in the sweaty, uncomfortable room.
But the brilliance isn't just in the sound design. It's in the intellectual honesty of the script itself.
Because they did not shy away from the intense, incredibly bitter debate that preceded the vote for independence.
Not at all. They portrayed John Adams not as some serene, visionary statesman, but as an arrogant, deeply impatient radical who is actively alienating his peers.
I was riveted by how much time they actually dedicated to John Dickinson.
The delegate from Pennsylvania.
Right. He was the one who vehemently opposed independence. Now, in a lesser program, he would be written as a cowardly cartoon villain.
But here, Dickinson is given a massive, powerful, and impeccably logical platform.
He stands up and warns the Congress of civil war, of mob violence, absolute economic ruin.
He argues that they are basically engineering an illegal coup.
Yeah, and he points out the terrifying reality that they cannot possibly win a war against the greatest empire on earth when half of their own colonial population actively opposes the rebellion.
And Dickinson's arguments were historically valid. The broadcast forces the listener to grapple with them.
And the producers validate his terror by having the proceedings suddenly interrupted.
Right, the dispatch writer.
Yes. A dispatch writer bursts in to announce breaking news. 130 British ships, commanded by General Sir William Howe, have just arrived in New York Harbor.
The tension in that moment is unbelievable.
It's the 1940s equivalent of getting breaking news push notifications on your smartphone. Like, alert, 130 British warships spotted.
Alert, loyalist crowd attacks businessman in Philadelphia.
Exactly. When you hear it presented as unfolding news, you feel the visceral stomach-dropping anxiety of the moment. You realize that in 1776, this whole American experiment was hanging by a remarkably frayed thread.
The penalty for treason was the gallows. They were signing their own death warrants.
And by showcasing Dickinson's logical opposition and the looming military annihilation in New York, the broadcast fundamentally shifts the listener's relationship to the Declaration.
It transforms the document from a sacred but static artifact into a living, desperate testament to human courage.
It teaches the audience that the Republic wasn't born out of serene consensus, but out of agonizing choices made under extreme duress.
And that deliberate demystification of the founders didn't stop there?
No, it didn't. We heard another incredible program called Biography and Sound, which dedicated an entire hour to George Washington.
Ah, yes.
The subtitle was literally The Man Nobody Knows, and they completely dismantled the stoic, unblinking face we see on the dollar bill.
They dug deep into his psychology, and frankly, some of it was shocking.
The Washington broadcast is a prime example of using historical biography to foster a deeper, more mature civic virtue. They explored aspects of his life that textbooks traditionally gloss over.
To protect his mythology, basically.
Right. For instance, I had absolutely no idea about his mother.
Mary Ball Washington.
Yes. The broadcast revealed that Washington was tormented by this difficult, demanding, and seemingly deeply selfish mother. They detailed how she never once visited him at Mount Vernon over a span of 30 years.
That's just wild to think about.
And when he was inaugurated as the first president, she died shortly after, without ever writing him a single word of congratulations.
The psychological weight of that on a man carrying the fate of a new nation is just immense.
It really provides a psychological grounding. But they also ventured into his romantic life.
Exploring his agonizing, unrequited love for his best friend's wife, Sally Fairfax.
Which wasn't just a brief infatuation. He harbored a deep passion for her for a quarter of a century, writing her these heavily veiled, emotional letters long after he had won the revolution and established the government.
And they even highlighted his legendary temper.
Oh man, that scene.
There is a deeply unsettling dramatization of the American retreat from New York, specifically at Kips Bay,
where Washington's soldiers break the line and start fleeing in absolute panic.
Right. And Washington is so overcome with rage, so humiliated by their cowardice, that he draws his riding whip and charges his horse right into his own fleeing men,
packing and cutting at them like a madman,
sobbing in utter frustration while the British are advancing.
It's intense. But the expert commentary woven into that broadcast makes a profound point. It argues that Washington's greatness does not stem from a lack of human weakness,
but rather from his lifelong struggle to master his own ungovernable passions.
He wasn't born perfect. He developed his character through brutal, repeated failure.
So when he finally crosses the Delaware River on Christmas night in 1776, the broadcast makes you realize he isn't executing a flawless, predetermined strategy.
No, he is a desperate, exhausted, emotionally volatile general taking a massive, all-or-nothing gamble because he has literally no other options.
So mechanically, what is the psychological effect on the listener hearing this?
Well, if you're a citizen sitting in your living room, you look at Washington and you finally see a human being. And the implicit message is, if a profoundly flawed, easily angered, emotionally burdened human being can achieve greatness and build a republic.
Maybe ordinary people are capable of participating in that greatness too.
Exactly. It completely democratizes heroism.
Precisely. Which transitions us naturally into how this radio schedule portrayed the lived experience of the country. Because American identity, as presented in this marathon, wasn't just about high-minded political theory or military history.
Right.
It was deeply, inextricably rooted in the sensory, tangible, ordinary details of everyday life.
And that tangible reality was captured perfectly in Orson Welles' performance of Norman Corwin's script, Between Americans.
Oh, that was stunning.
If anyone wants to understand how radio can paint a picture, this is it. Welles delivers this mesmerizing, rapid-fire monologue articulating that America isn't just a set of legal documents. It's a vast, chaotic sensory experience.
Corwin's writing in that piece is a phenomenal example of civic poetry.
It really is.
He bypasses the intellect and goes straight for the associative memory of the listener.
He catalogs the sounds and smells of the country. He talks about the smell of bacon and eggs frying in a diner on a Tuesday morning.
He describes the fierce, utterly serious arguments between two guys at a bar over whether the Yankees or the Red Sox are the better baseball team.
Yes, and he specifically highlights the rhythmic clatter of the BMT Express train carrying office workers to Brooklyn. The sound of the ocean at high tide hitting a Coast Guard station.
And my favorite part, two mechanics, Pete and Joe, down in a grease pit.
Crawling under a 1936 Buick with an extension light, trying to fix a transmission.
And Welles delivers the culminating line with such resonance. You know, you cannot define America merely by a white dome in Washington, D.C.
It is found in the mill towns, steel towns, tobacco towns, swimming holes, gas stations, Sunday papers.
It is a profoundly grounded, tactile view of patriotism. It suggests that the nation is defined by the daily, unglamorous friction of its people living together.
But the schedule didn't just rely on poetic monologues to show ordinary life. They boldly included straight-up sitcoms in the middle of a 4th of July broadcast.
Which is so interesting.
I was initially so jarred by this. You have these sweeping orchestral tributes to Abraham Lincoln, and then suddenly you were listening to comedy shows like The Great Gildersleeve and Our Miss Brooks.
Right.
I honestly wondered if it ruined the sacred tone of the holiday. But the more I listened, I realized it was entirely intentional.
Oh, it is highly intentional. And it highlights a crucial philosophical distinction.
How so?
Well, the inclusion of comedy is inherently anti-aristocratic. Totalitarian regimes do not produce self-deprecating sitcoms on their national holidays.
That's a good point.
They produce rigid, humorless military parades.
Right. In The Great Gildersleeve, you have this pompous, slightly ridiculous, but incredibly lovable guy who decides he wants to be patriotic and hang a massive American flag out of his attic window for the 4th of July.
And it's an utter disaster.
It's complete disaster.
Yeah.
He can't find a proper flagpole, so he tries to jury-rig it with a wire coat hanger. The window sash crashes down, and he gets pinned halfway out the window, dangling over the street in a too tight Palm Beach suit.
Clutching Old Glory and screaming for his neighbor to come rescue him.
It's hilarious slapstick, but think about what it represents. It represents the freedom to be spectacularly mundane.
Exactly. Or take our Miss Brooks.
Right.
She is an overworked, underpaid English teacher just trying to escape for the holiday weekend. She gets into a ridiculous confrontation with her cranky, authoritative principal, Mr. Conklin.
And she tries to help him clean a spot on his suit.
But accidentally uses ammonia instead of spot remover.
The chemical burns right through the fabric, and in her panic, she just pulls a loose thread until the principal's entire lapel unravels while she is mid-conversation with him.
It kind of levels the playing field. The authority figure, the principal, is stripped of his dignity by a simple comedic accident.
But if you contrast that gentle suburban comedy with another program we heard, Calling All Cars, you get the much darker side of that same ordinary freedom.
Oh, Calling All Cars.
Yeah, it was a 1930s true crime police blotter, dramatizing real dispatch logs. And their 4th of July episode was pure, unfiltered chaos.
It provides a vital, stabilizing counterweight to the sentimentality of the other programs.
It really does.
It proves that this radio collection wasn't just wearing rose-colored glasses.
Because the police in this broadcast aren't attending beautiful parades. They are dealing with the messy, ugly reality of human nature on a holiday.
They respond to domestic disputes, like a drunk husband hitting his wife because of a misunderstanding over picnic supplies.
They engage in a high-speed chase with guys in a green Hudson who knocked a pedestrian out cold by smashing a ketchup bottle over his head.
Over a ketchup bottle.
Yeah. And they are dispatched to gruesome, depressing suicide attempts by gas heater and by chloride of mercury.
And then there's that almost surreal segment.
Oh, man, where they have to rescue a stunt parachutist who jumped out over a beach pier,
Only to have a pocket full of firecrackers accidentally ignite on the way down.
setting his pants on fire before he hits the water. I mean, it is absolute bedlam.
But the real question is, why do the producers believe a ketchup bottle assault and a burning parachutist belong in a marathon celebrating the birth of the nation?
Right, why include that?
Because it illustrates the critical difference between nationalism and genuine patriotism.
Okay, break that down.
Nationalism is a sterilized, idealized, deeply uncritical worship of the state apparatus. It demands that the citizen ignore the flaws of the society.
Right.
True patriotism, however, loves the country as it actually is. Messy, funny, sometimes violent, chaotic, and filled with beautifully flawed people just trying to survive a hard night or enjoy a barbecue.
I kept asking myself, is this the ultimate genius of the American experiment? The fact that we can have a national holiday that encompasses both a sacred, tear-inducing reverence for the Declaration of Independence and the absolute right to be an idiot.
To shoot off loud carbide cannons in the front yard.
Eat too many barbecued frankfurters and listen to a guy get stuck in an attic window.
Yes. It is the liberty to not have to think about the government every single minute of your life. It is the freedom of the private sphere.
Wow, yeah.
However, as our 24-hour deep dive progressed chronologically through the decades, a shadow really fell over the programming.
The tone shifted dramatically.
It did. Because the broadcasts began to confront the geopolitical realities of the late 1930s and early 1940s, the realization set in that the right to be mundane was under severe existential threat.
Which brings us to the era of the marathon I started thinking of as the crucible. You cannot listen to a 4th of July broadcast from the Golden Age without colliding with the absolute horrors of World War II.
And the rise of modern totalitarianism.
And the absolute anchor of this era was a specific broadcast commemorating the 150th anniversary of the Bill of Rights, titled We Hold These Truths.
It is one of the most significant pieces of radio history ever produced.
Featuring a chilling, highly calculated address by President Franklin Delano Roosevelt.
To understand the impact of this speech, you really must understand the political climate of 1941. America was fiercely divided.
Right.
The America First Committee and powerful isolationist forces were arguing that the United States should completely ignore the war in Europe.
And FDR uses this broadcast to systematically dismantle the isolationist argument. He states point blank that freedom cannot survive as an oasis, surrounded by a cruel desert of dictatorship.
It's an incredible metaphor.
It is. He tells the American people that the old romantic ways of defending liberty, standing in a field with pitchforks and muskets like the Minutemen, are no longer enough.
He warns them that the juggernaut of modern mechanized force is on the move, and oceans will no longer protect them.
FDR was preparing the psychological ground for war. But what is truly fascinating about the radio programming from this era is how it synthesized this terrifying geopolitical reality with a profound, almost religious sense of gratitude.
They wove poetry and the concept of mass sacrifice directly into the entertainment.
The poetry was just haunting. We heard the actor Ronald Colman reading Edna St. Vincent Millay's D-Day poem, Poem and Prayer for an Invading Army.
The gravity in his voice, it forces you to stop whatever you are doing.
And it wasn't just a tribute to the soldiers storming the beaches either. It was a massive acknowledgement of the logistical apparatus required to fight global evil.
It honored the men and women covered in grease in the munitions factories.
The farmers planting extra crops to feed the troops. The coal miners working in what the poem called dark and dangerous corridors deep underground.
Never seeing the sun so that the steel mills could keep burning.
It recognized that total war requires the total mobilization of the civic body. We also heard the soaring aviation poem, High Flight, written by John Gillespie McGee, Jr.
Oh, I have slipped the surly bonds of earth and touched the face of God.
When the announcer revealed that McGee was just a 19-year-old pilot who was killed in action shortly after writing those words, it completely strips the breath from your lungs.
It really does.
And then they played the Ballad of the Leatherneck Corps, which charted the history of the Marines from the shores of Tripoli all the way to their deployment in Iceland in 1941, always arriving first to face the worst.
If you analyze the entire crucible section of this marathon, the defining characteristic is the complete and utter absence of cynicism.
Which is so rare today.
In our modern media diet, sincerity is almost instantly met with irony, snark, or deep skepticism. But these programs maintained a profound intellectual honesty.
They didn't hide the brutality of war.
No, they explicitly contextualized it. They made it abundantly clear to the listener that the everyday liberties celebrated in the comedy shows, the right to be silly, to complain about your boss, to argue about baseball in a diner, were currently being paid for in blood across the globe.
They linked patriotism directly and inextricably to gratitude. The underlying message was clear. You have absolutely no right to enjoy the 4th of July barbecue unless you are consciously grateful for the men holding the perimeter in the dark that makes the barbecue possible.
This was echoed so powerfully by the religious thinkers featured in the broadcasts, too, like Bishop Fulton Sheen.
Yes. Fulton Sheen's inclusion adds a vital philosophical layer to the collection. Sheen argued that democracy cannot merely be a numerical exercise.
Because if democracy is just 51% of the population voting to impose their will on the other 49%, it can easily become a tyranny of the majority.
Right. Sheen and others in the broadcasts posited that American democracy relies on a moral framework, a shared belief that human rights are granted by a creator, not by the state.
And therefore cannot be revoked by the state.
Which ties perfectly into Norman Corwin's Psalm for a Dark Year. It was broadcast during the bleakest days of the war, and it functioned almost like a secular prayer.
It didn't promise easy victory.
No, it asked for the spiritual endurance to survive a long, dark night. It proved that this civilization wasn't just capable of technological might, but of deep, reflective faith.
But all of this discussion so far has been Americans talking about America. As the marathon continued, the producers did something brilliant. They shifted the lens. They asked, how do observers from the outside view the American character?
And this brings us to what I consider the sociological core of the entire marathon. The dramatized observations of two European intellectuals, Alexis de Tocqueville and G.K. Chesterton.
Both men visited America, observed its people closely, and were completely fascinated by the contradictions they witnessed.
The Tocqueville dramatization was fascinating. They set the scene in Albany, New York, in the year 1831.
Right.
Tocqueville is asleep in his hotel room, and he is suddenly awakened on the morning of the 4th of July by a massive artillery salute.
Because of his background, his immediate visceral reaction is panic.
He thinks the city is under attack. His traveling companion is terrified they have woken up in the middle of a revolution and need to rush to the barricades.
You really have to understand the trauma of the French historical experience to get why this is profound. In Europe, revolution and civic uprising were inherently bloody affairs. They involved the guillotine, the slaughter of the aristocracy, the burning of estates, and the violent overthrow of kings.
So Tocqueville expects chaos.
He is genuinely shocked to discover that Independence Day in America is celebrated peacefully.
He walks outside and marvels at a gathering in a local Methodist church where the citizens are quietly, respectfully listening to a reading of the Declaration of Independence.
He describes it as a fine, dignified spectacle.
But the broadcast dug into his sociological observations too, specifically regarding this unique concept of American equality. Tocqueville points out a linguistic distinction that reveals everything about the culture.
He notes that in America, servants don't really exist in the traditional European aristocratic sense.
They're simply referred to as help.
Because in a functioning democracy, the servant is not fundamentally a different species of human being from the master. The class structure is fluid.
The help working in the kitchen today might save their money, move west, and become the master of their own enterprise tomorrow.
Tocqueville astutely notes that to give an American working man a tip would almost insult and humiliate him.
Because tipping implies a permanent, subservient class difference. He observed a society where the conditions of the people were constantly restlessly trending toward equality.
And that restlessness transitions beautifully into the observations of G.K. Chesterton.
Chesterton's analysis of what he called the American live wire was wildly perceptive. He argued that Americans view excitement, speed, and nervous energy not just as a temporary mood, but as an actual moral ideal.
It is a brilliant philosophical distinction. Chesterton, viewing America through an English lens, points out that the traditional Englishman might pride himself on being an immovable post.
He compares the ideal Englishman to a cannonball.
Solid, heavy, difficult to move. But, he adds dryly, a cannonball is also completely dead.
The American, conversely, prides himself on being a live wire.
To the American mind, sensibility, excitability, and the willingness to be moved are actually components of virility.
They aren't ashamed of displaying emotion or putting their entire soul into the machinery of their work.
He also talked about American curiosity in a way that I had never considered.
Oh yeah, he said that when an American asks you a million questions, it isn't seen as rude snooping like a detective looking through a keyhole.
It's driven by the dignity of an explorer.
He famously called the American citizen a Christopher Columbus of daily life.
Every new interaction is an uncharted continent to be discovered.
It is such a grand romantic phrase.
But this raises an essential, potentially troubling question, doesn't it? If the American ideal is this restless, sensitive, easily provoked live wire energy.
This is exactly where I found myself pushing back on Chesterton's romanticism. He paints this live wire energy as a grand, noble virtue. But as I was listening, I realized, doesn't that exact same high-voltage energy explain the absolute chaos we heard earlier in the Calling All Cars police blotter?
Ah, I see where you're going.
If our national character is inherently excitable, highly sensitive, and constantly in motion, isn't that precisely why we have guys brawling with ketchup bottles over a perceived insult on a sidewalk?
It totally is.
Is it possible that our greatest virtue, our restless creative energy, is simultaneously the exact source of our greatest societal messes?
That is the ultimate paradox of the American character, and Chesterton was entirely aware of it. He noted that there is a profound sense of honor, almost akin to a 17th century duelist, in the American's readiness to be provoked.
The sheer pettiness of the pretext, two guys throwing punches over a parking spot or two millionaires ruthlessly ruining each other over a minor slight, illustrates the dark side of that same virtue of excitability.
The energy is morally neutral. It is the exact same fire that builds the immense steel mills, constructs the towering skyscrapers, and wins global wars.
But it also inevitably overflows into the streets.
It just depends on whether that fire is safely contained in an industrial furnace or whether it's burning down the house.
Wow. When you frame it like that, the entire 24-hour broadcast schedule starts to make sense as a single, coherent psychological portrait.
It really does tie everything together.
So as we sit here in the studio, bringing all these diverse threads together, the history, the humor, the war, the philosophy, what is the ultimate takeaway? What kind of civilization produced this?
I believe this marathon reveals a civilization that possessed a deep, complex, and extraordinarily mature affection for its own story. As we established earlier, this was not blind, unthinking nationalism.
It was a clear-eyed civic virtue.
It was a culture confident enough to embrace its highbrow history, its lowbrow slapstick humor, its profound geopolitical tragedies, and its deep religious faith all at once without feeling the neurotic need to segregate them into different ideological silos.
They understood that you need all of it to form a complete citizen.
And what's truly wild is how surprisingly modern these productions feel to the ear. We tend to think of old radio as quaint, but the writing is incredibly sharp.
The sound design, whether it's the buzzing horseflies, the sweltering Continental Congress, the echoing footsteps of the police officers in a dark alley, or the rhythmic clatter of the BMT Express, is deeply cinematically immersive.
The emotional resonance is completely timeless.
If there is one paramount lesson that today's fragmented media ecosystem can learn from these Golden Age productions, it is to profoundly trust the intelligence of your audience.
The creators of these programs did not talk down to the listener.
No, they did not assume the public was only capable of digesting simplified outrage or tailored dopamine hits.
They assumed the audience was fully capable of holding two contradictory thoughts at once. The realization that the nation was deeply flawed and prone to chaos, and the unwavering belief that it was simultaneously a glorious, vital experiment worth defending with your life.
They trusted you, the listener sitting by the radio dial, to sit through a sobering reading of the Bill of Rights and a ridiculous comedy routine about a carbide cannon, and to understand that both were essential parts of the whole American tapestry.
Which leaves us with a final provocative thought to ponder as we turn off the studio mics tonight.
The central question of our era: can a massive, diverse nation actually survive without these shared stories to act as the cultural glue?
If we were to attempt to broadcast a single all-day sonic portrait of America today and put it into a time capsule to be opened 80 years from now, what would it sound like?
Would it just be a chaotic, unintelligible cacophony of Isolated, personalized, algorithmic feeds shouting over one another?
Or could we still somehow find a single frequency that holds us together the way these broadcasts once did?
It is the stark difference between 100 million people listening to bespoke realities in separate locked rooms and 100 million people gathered around the warmth of the exact same campfire.
Perfectly said.
Well, I want to thank you for joining us here in the studio at Chesterton Radio for this special deep dive. As you head out into whatever is left of your night, we'll leave you with the fading echo of this historical reflection, the scent of the fireworks dissipating in the air, and perhaps the faint, distant crackling sound of an American live wire.